Chapter 1. Blood and Obsidian. The chamber was carved from obsidian so dark it devoured the torchlight, each flickering flame struggling against the weight of shadow that clung to every surface like old blood. The air within the Sanctum of Whispers stank of wine, incense, and secrets far older than the fortress itself. Vaelir Mordrak stood at the chamber's heart, clad in barbed plate lacquered with blood oil, his cloak of flayed skin stirring in the silence. The floor beneath him was etched in arcane script that pulsed faintly, veins of crimson light throbbing with a heartbeat not his own. The 999 not bow as the scrying orb ignited before him. He simply watched as the swirling smoke parted to reveal her face. Morati, the hag sorceress, the mother of pain and poison. Her beauty was monstrous in its perfection, like a statue carved to drive mortals mad. Lips curled in an amused sneer, her golden eyes studied Vaelir through the veil of eldritch glass as though weighing the worth of a blade before driving it into something soft. "Vaelir Mordrak," she purred, her voice like silk across a wound. "It seems one of your discarded playthings has delusions of divinity." The smoke shifted, forming the unmistakable silhouette of a female dark elf, her figure regal, adorned in robes of twisting bone and flesh, crowned in a circlet that bled light like a dying star. Selentha Vile. Even her name dripped venom. Vaelir said nothing, but the tightening of his jaw spoke volumes. "She has declared herself a goddess in the far north," Morathi continued, her tone turning brittle. "Among the savage tribes of men and worse. They worship her, Vaelir. They offer her hearts. She builds temples from their bones." The orb darkened for a moment. Then, suddenly, a battlefield. Flayed corpses impaled upon twisted pikes. Entire chaos warbands bowing before an altar sculpted from fused bodies. And atop it, Selentha, wreathed in light that should not exist in this world. She calls herself the Pale Flame now. Laughable. But amusing has its limits. Vareti's gaze sharpened. "You trained her. You broke her. This is your failure, and so it shall be your redemption. Slay her, or bring her to me in chains of shadow. Anything less, and one shall see your soul bartered to the harpies." The vision faded. Vaelir was left alone in the chamber, but the darkness seemed to pulse with amusement. It was in the solitude of his private war sanctum that the memories returned. Selentha, younger then, her eyes defiant even beneath the agony, Mac-he 500 fastened to her during her trials. She had been a prodigy of pain, a weaver of shadows and screaming spirits. He had taken her under his tutelage not for kindness, but to mold her into a weapon unlike any other. And then, the rite. It was supposed to grant her deeper communion with the void, a controlled exposure to the realm of chaos beneath a moonless eclipse. He had drawn the runes himself, carved the victims, chosen the site. But she had gone too far. Called something she could not control. There had been no screams when she vanished, only a rush of heatless wind and a light that turned his soldiers blind for 3 days. She was gone. Until now. The black arc-daga of midnight loomed over the shattered coast like a floating fortress built from nightmares. Towering above the foam-flecked waves, its hull was wrought from the bones of krakens and basalt torn from the bed of the world. Blood-rusted chains rattled with every wave, and demon-bound lanterns flickered with imprisoned souls. Vaelir stood on the upper deck, gazing northward. The chaos wastes yawned somewhere beyond the horizon, an endless maelstrom of madness, where time bent and gods whispered in blood. The sky was already darker here, roiling with bruised clouds shaped like screaming faces. Thunder echoed, but no lightning ever followed. Behind him, the war host assembled. Executioners from Har Ganeth, silent, disciplined, faces hidden behind impassive helms. Their blades dripped with poison that could melt bone. A trio of warlocks, swathed in violet robes, the runes on their skin crawling as if alive. One of them bled constantly from the eyes and laughed at things no one else could hear. Witch-elves of Cain, led by High Matriarch Salith, a woman whose voice could seduce or flay. Her lips were stained with the blood of lovers and traitors, often the same. And finally, the shadow-bound assassins of the Silent Choir. They spoke only in gestures. One was rumored to have slit at Drake's throat 1499 flight. Each of them had been chosen with care. Each of them had been promised something. Power, vengeance, secrets. None of them trusted the others. Perfect. That night, a storm rose without warning. Winds shrieked through the spires of the Black Ark, carrying with them voices in a dozen forgotten tongues. The waves boiled as if the sea itself resisted their voyage. Tentacled things breached the surface and screamed blasphemies. Lightning finally struck, but it came in every color except white. Vaelir stood at the prow, rain lashing against his armor. He 999 not blink as the sky split open, revealing a glimpse of something vast and wrong, something with eyes. Salentha was waiting, and she knew he was coming. He whispered a single word, ancient and forbidden. The storm answered. Chapter 2. Into the Maw. The sky above the northern shoreline was bruised with veins of sickly violet, bleeding across the horizon like a festering wound. Here, at the edge of the world where reality thinned and whimpered beneath the weight of chaos, the sea boiled with foul humors, and the wind carried the scent of copper and decay. The dagger of midnight loomed like a leviathan from some ancient nightmare, its anchor plunging into waters that hissed and shrieked as if wounded. Landfall had never been more than a formality in the past. Raids, pillagings, slaughter. But this was not Nagaratha coastline, nor even the blighted shores of Norska. This was the Chaos Wastes, where the world no longer obeyed the laws of gods or men, and where each footstep might echo through dimensions not yet born. The war host disembarked in silence. Dark elf war galleys, obsidian sleek and spined with barbed prows, rode to shore through waters thick with coagulated algae and flayed fish. Warlocks chanted shielding hexes over the hulls to ward off the malign spirits swirling beneath the waves. Still, 2 boats never reached land. One simply sank with a groan. The other exploded in a blossom of bone shards and screams, the sea birthing tendrils of barbed darkness that dragged the survivors down one by one. Vaelir Mordrak, mounted upon his reptilian Cold One, disembarked first. The beast snarled, uneasy even beneath the suppressive control of his spurred will. The beach they landed on was not sand, but pulverized bone, bleached white and mixed with black grit. Vast, jagged spires rose in the distance, silhouettes like fangs jutting from the earth itself. The wind carried more than cold, it carried whispers, promises, and accusations in voices he almost recognized. The witch-elves moved with unholy grace, their silver blades reflecting the shifting sky. Warlocks stepped lightly, muttering mantras to contain their own power. The executioners marched in perfect unity, their halberds bristling with rune-etched cruelty. Around them the landscape shimmered and writhed. Nothing here was stable. Stones bled, trees wept ichor, and the horizon moved when not watched directly. They hadn't marched for more than an hour before the first assault came. The scouts spotted them first, writhing figures cresting a ridge, moving in uneven, broken strides. At first glance they were merely tribesmen, human barbarians daubed in blood and fetishes. But as they approached, details resolved that shattered any illusion of mortality. One bore 4 arms, each grasping a jagged shard of obsidian glass. Another's face split open vertically, revealing a lamprey mouth that gibbered in praise of the pale flame. Many were naked, flesh painted with runes carved directly into their skin, but others wore makeshift armor, crafted from broken weapons and stitched corpses. They screamed her name as they charged. Selentha, pale flame, mother of wounds, fire goddess of the end. The charge was a wave of insanity. Vaelir raised his fist and gave a single curt signal. The witch-elves broke into a sprint, their pleasure-made howls meeting the shrieks of the zealots in a collision of gore. Blades flashed, arteries sprayed. One elf danced as she severed limbs and tongues, her skin slick with steaming blood. The executioners formed a wall, methodical and unrelenting. Their halberds rose and fell in a terrible rhythm, carving chunks of flesh and splintered bone with surgical precision. But the enemy 999 not break. They threw themselves into the meat grinder with suicidal zeal, biting, clawing, even detonating themselves in bursts of warp fire. Some began to glow 1499 charge, erupting into radiant explosions that melted the flesh off dark elven faces. A warlock screamed as a daemon tore through the veil inside his soul, his skin peeling away as the spirit burst forth, a thing of fire and glass that howled in tongues as it turned upon its former allies. The battle devolved into a frenzy. Vaelir dismounted, slicing his cold one free to let it slaughter at will. His twin blades, Voidfang and Sorrowkiss, sang through the air, each strike punctuated by sprays of blood and ruptured bone. He moved with surgical precision, his armor glistening with gore, his eyes cold and distant. He killed not for pleasure, but with the inevitability of a guillotine. Then came the shriek. A figure stepped forward from the enemy's rear lines, taller, regal even amidst the filth. Adorned in a mantle of stitched scalps, it bore a crude staff wrapped in barbed wire and crowned with a burning heart. Its voice was not human. "She sees you, Mordrak," it hissed, pointing at him with a limb that once may have been an arm. "She remembers your hands around her throat. She dreams of your death like a lover's kiss." Vaelir flung Voidfang with a practiced motion. The blade screamed as it flew and struck true, splitting the creature's skull in half. Silence followed. The surviving zealots dropped to their knees, sobbing, laughing, clawing at their own faces. Some set themselves on fire. Others began to consume their own flesh. The battle was over, but the war was only beginning. Later, amidst the ruins of what once might have been a chaos war camp, Vaelir walked alone through the aftermath. The ground was saturated with blood. Flayed corpses had been nailed to stone pylons in worshipful poses, eyes torn out and replaced with burning coals. Sorceress glyphs scrawled in ichor still pulsed faintly across the rocks, twisting subtly when viewed from different angles. It was there, amidst the carnage, that he found it. A banner, tall and proud, affixed to a spear driven into a cairn of skulls. The fabric shimmered faintly, not cloth but skin, elven skin, tanned and treated, stitched together with exquisite precision. On its surface, the symbol of the pale flame blazed, an open eye engulfed in curling tongues of fire. Beneath it, in delicate script that only Vaelir could read, was a message. "Come find me, teacher." He stared for a long time. The wind stirred the banner. It fluttered like laughter. And for the first time in years, Vaelir Mordrak felt something stir in his chest. Not fear, not anger, but recognition. She knew he was coming, and she welcomed it. Chapter 3. Hollow Gods and Hungering Earth. The deeper the warband pushed into the wastes, the more the world seemed to rebel against its own shape. What began as subtle distortions, shimmering horizons, echoes without sound, shadows that pointed in the wrong direction, soon tore free of all pretense. Reality warped in plain sight, brazen and predatory, as though the land itself wished to unmake them. The first sign was the gravity shift. One moment the executioners marched with their usual disciplined tread, halberds raised in perfect formation. The next they lurched forward as if their armor had gained thrice its weight. Some dropped to their knees, their boots sinking into the earth as though wading through sludge. Others were yanked upward, armor creaking, their feet barely scraping the ground, as though pulled by an invisible tide. A warlock hissed a counter-incantation and flattened against the soil, pressing his cheek to the shifting ground. "His breathing," he whispered. He was correct. The earth pulsed beneath them like the hide of some colossal beast, each rhythmic contraction sending tremors through their bodies. Soil rose and fell in shallow ripples, stones shifting like joints beneath a skin of moss. Vents opened and closed, exhaling warm, wet air. In some places the ground quivered underfoot, as though stifling a scream. Even the sky was not immune. Clouds contorted into spirals and then into snarling maws. Distant mountains twisted in corkscrews, their peaks spinning slowly like the hands of a broken clock. Time itself seemed to stretch and lag. An hour's march would shrink to the span of a few breaths, while a single minute at rest could feel like days spent in a fever dream. Whispers followed them. They seeped from the rocks, from the wind, from the droplets of condensation sliding down armor plates. Some slithered into the ears of the witch elves, twisting their bloodlust into conspiratorial mutters. Others infiltrated the warlocks' wards, telling them secrets they should never hear. Some even took the voices of the dead, mothers, brothers, lovers, tongues of pure malice wearing comforting familiarity. Vaelir heard them too, at first as faint murmurings, then as clear-spoken words, commands, warnings, and accusations, drawn from memories buried centuries deep. You failed her. You watched her burn. You made her hunger. You made her flee into the dark. He clenched his jaw and pressed onward, blade drawn but hands steady. He would not show weakness. Not here. Not in front of the creatures who served him only so long as he appeared invincible. But the land had teeth, and they saw him clearly. They camped on a plateau of broken shale, though calling it camp implied a stability absent in this place. Fires burned cold blue. Time stuttered and looped. A witch-elf walked in circles for half an hour without noticing, leaving a perfect ring of bloody footprints. The sky flickered like a lantern about to go out. That was when the beastmen struck. It started with a low guttural bray that rolled across the landscape like thunder. Then came the pounding of hooves, far too many, and far too close for the scant warning they 500 had. Executioners snapped to formation. Witch-elves shrieked in delighted anticipation, blades raised. The warlocks hissed incantations, their fingertips glowing with obsidian flame. The first beastman erupted from a fissure in the rock, a monstrous thing, easily twice the height of an elf. Its horns spiraled unnaturally, curving backward into its own spine, and emerging from its belly in a grotesque cage of bone. Its face was split vertically from brow to throat, each half twitching independently as it bellowed. More followed. Some bounded across the plateau on too many limbs, 6 arms, 4 legs, or none at all, propelled only by serpentine tails that left blistered trails in their wake. Others were swollen with mutation, torsos unraveling into tendril masses or mouths blooming across their chests like obscene flowers dripping with bile. That they were not merely beastmen. They were anointed, chosen by Salenta, and they charged with a zeal that outmatched even the most fanatical Cainite cults. The plateau dissolved into chaos. Warlocks hurled bolts of void flame, black fire that consumed flesh but left bone untouched. Executioners sliced through muscle and sinew, only to watch limbs regrow, 1499's swing. Witch-elves leapt onto the backs of the creatures, carving eyes and tongues with wild laughter, even as mutated jaws snapped at their limbs. One beastman, colossal and crowned with a halo of floating shards of bone, lunged at Vaelir's chief sorcerer, Thyrant. Its claws crackled with shimmering pink fire, warping the air around them. Thyrant barely raised a shield before it shattered like glass. The beastman's claws raked across his chest, ripping through robes and armor, exposing ribs slick with blood. Thyrant staggered, gasping, his wards flickering. Another blow would have ended him. A third might have devoured his soul entirely. Vaelir intervened. He surged forward, blades flashing, and severed the beastman's arm at the joint. The limb 999 not fall. It crawled, fingers seeking purchase, but Vaelir kicked it aside and drove Sorceress deep into the creature's sternum. Voidfang followed, cleaving its throat. The beastman convulsed, its wounds glowing with sickly light, then collapsed in a steaming heap. But there were dozens more. A witch-elf shrieked as a demon-possessed beastman tore her in half. An assassin vanished into a cloud of warp-fly larvae, his screams cut short. An executioner fought with both arms severed, his halberd held between his teeth, until a mutated hoof crushed his skull. When the final monster fell, the plateau was carpeted in gore. The earth drank greedily, pulsing like an engorged leech. Thyrant survived, but barely. He was pale, trembling, blood bubbling from his wounds in unnatural patterns. When he spoke, his voice was a whisper rasped from a dying throat. "Touched me," he muttered. Vaelir frowned. "Selentha?" "No." The sorcerer coughed, and steam rose from his lips. "A beast-man. But before it died, it showed me her. She healed them. With a kiss." His eyes widened in terror. "Her lips burned them whole. Burned them into purity." He retched violently, coughing up blood the color of molten silver. "She is changing them, Vaelir, perfecting them, making them hers." The warlocks dragged him away for treatment, though all knew the chaos waste rarely spared those marked by such corruption. Vaelir stood at the plateau's edge, staring into the shifting horizon. That was when the hallucinations returned. At first, a flicker, movement at the corner of his eye, then a figure stepped from the rippling air, formed from shadow and memory. Selentha, not the monstrous goddess she had become in the zealot's eyes, but Selentha as she once was, a young acolyte draped in simple robes, her gaze sharp and unbroken. Her lips curled into the smallest hint of a smile. "Do you remember the rite, Vaelir?" she asked softly. "What you whispered in my ear before the veil opened?" He staggered backward, blades half raised. Her voice was calm, familiar, too real, and she should not be real. He blinked, and she was gone. But the whisper remained, curling around his bones like smoke. "You are close," and the land beneath him shuddered, as though laughing. Chapter 4. The Temple of Breathing Stone. The temple stood like a wound in the land, a titanic silhouette hewn from obsidian and impossibility. Its spires clawed at the sky with veins of fire coursing beneath their surface, and the stone shimmered as if slick with sweat. It pulsed slowly, inhaling and exhaling through fissures along its walls, a rhythmic expansion and contraction that mimicked the breath of a sleeping god. The air around it was thick with humidity and the stench of copper and incense, undercut by a musk that smelled unmistakably alive. Bones, thousands of them, formed spiraled cairns leading up to the great gate, some polished to ivory brightness, others cracked and raw, still oozing sap-like blood. Etched into the gate's arch was Selentha's mark, the eye of the pale flame, carved so deep into the stone that the lines wept a dull crimson light. Vaelir Mordrak approached first, weapons sheathed, armor gleaming dully beneath the choking sky. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Behind him, the surviving members of the war host followed, silent, wary, blades already slick from the last slaughter. As they drew closer, the gate responded. It breathed. With a wet, sucking groan, the slabs of black stone peeled apart like muscle, revealing a glistening passage of raw flesh stretched taut over bone-like supports. Runes of dark elf origin pulsed across the living walls, but they were twisted, corrupted, distorted by something deeper than sorcery. The warlocks hesitated. Even the witch-elves paused, their fervor momentarily smothered by revulsion. "This place is sacred," one of the warlocks murmured. "To her, we should not be here." Vaelir, 9999, not answer. He stepped forward into the pulsating corridor, the floor warm and slick beneath his armored boots. The others followed, blades drawn, incantations whispered under breath. The walls exhaled around them, every step accompanied by the groan of shifting muscle and the rhythmic beat of some great unseen heart. Torches lined the passage, but they burned without flame, tongues of white fire suspended in the air like glowing tears. They cast shadows that 999 not belonged to any of the elves, silhouettes that danced and bled across the walls in grotesque mimicry. The passage opened into a vast cathedral chamber. It was unmistakably dark elf in design, tall arches, predatory angles, and murals carved from onyx and bone, but the influence of chaos had violated every line. The walls rippled with slow movement, as if trying to remember their original shape. High above, where once there might have hung icons of Cain or murals of conquest, now writhed pulsating flesh ribbons that formed the vague outlines of Selentha's visage. Sometimes a goddess, sometimes a beast, sometimes a child, crowned in flame. And the saints. They stood in rows along the chamber's edges, statues carved not from marble or obsidian, but flesh turned to stone. Elven bodies, some in armor, others in robes, all familiar. Frozen 1499 scream, their eyes wide, lips contorted, skin calcified into a sickening, chalk-like texture. Salith, the witch-elf matriarch, ran a finger down one's cheek. It flaked beneath her touch. "These were warriors," she whispered. "Sacrificed. No, preserved, like insects in amber." "Offerings," Vaelis said, his voice flat. "She immortalized them, mocked them." They walked between the saints in silence. Each figure bore the mark of the pale flame burned into their chest. Some still glowed faintly. Each stood on a plinth, inscribed with names in High Druk-Eltharin, but some names Vaelir recognized, former allies, rival dreadlords. One, his eyes narrowed, was his former lover, executed years ago in Clair-Caron. She should have been ash. Yet here she stood, arms outstretched in eternal agony. He turned away. That was when the chanting began. It echoed from the far end of the chamber, soft, lilting, almost melodic. Not elven, but something adjacent, a dialect warped by centuries of whispered madness. They moved as one toward the source, through corridors of living flesh, past altars of bone arranged like blooming flowers, until they reached a sanctum drenched in golden light. Floating in the center was a warlock. His name was Zaroth. He had been with them since the shores. He had killed for Vaelir. He had survived. And now he hovered naked above a pool of molten glass, his eyes replaced by orbs of fire, his veins glowing beneath translucent skin. "Selentha is not a goddess of death," he whispered, voice echoing with unearthly resonance. "She is life made pure. She offers truth to those who suffer." The air around him shimmered, He called to me, Vaelir. Even now, she whispers, the pain you gave her, it birthed her. You are not her hunter. You are her father. His feet touched the ground. His body was still smoking. One will not let you kill her. A warlock near Vaelir shouted a warning, but too late. Zeroth flung out his hand. Reality tore like parchment, revealing a snarling vortex of flesh and fire. A demon shrieked as it clawed its way free, the walls of the sanctum screaming in sympathy. Vaelir moved without hesitation. He was across the chamber in a breath, blades drawn. Sorrowkiss deflected the daemon's claws. Voidfang sank into Zeroth's thigh. The warlock laughed, a terrible, broken sound. You cannot kill me, one AEM. Vaelir drove both blades into his chest and twisted. Zeroth howled, but his body didn't fall. It unraveled. Skin flayed backward, revealing pulsating muscle, then glimmering bone. Then light. Not holy, not divine, just raw, scorching, agonizing flame. Vaelir raised his left hand, its gauntlet inscribed with soul-binding sigils, and invoked the Black Mirror rite. A shard of polished obsidian appeared, hovering before the corpse as it imploded inward, drawn into its own screaming mouth. Zeroth's soul didn't die. It howled. Trapped within the mirror, his essence twisted against its prison, his face stretched across the inner surface like a trapped scream. Vaelir held the mirror aloft. You chose her, he said coldly. Now you will watch as one end her. He affixed the mirror to his belt. Let the traitor bear witness. As they left the sanctum, the statues along the walls began to whisper, not aloud, but in the minds of every elf who passed. Welcome. Return. Become. Feeler 919 and look back. But he heard Selentha's laughter. Soft. Loving. Cold as the void. Chapter 5. The Choir of Flayed Echoes. The land itself screamed beneath their boots. The pale flame's domain began not with a line, but with a threshold of sensation, an overwhelming hum in the bones, a pressure behind the eyes, a weight on the soul. The sky bled more color than it should, hues unnatural and layered in ways no mortal eye should perceive. The horizon looped endlessly, fractured into mirrored shards. No birds flew here, no beasts stirred. Only the wind moved, and it whispered lies in 1,000 familiar voices. What remained of Vaelir Mordrak's warhost crested the last ridge in solemn silence. The Temple of Breathing Stone still pulsed behind them, and already the weaker minds among them had begun to dream in flame and silk. Since Zeroth's betrayal there had been no rest, no sleep, just endless marching into a land that punished belief and rewarded delusion. The choir of flayed echoes was not marked on any map. No scout had ever returned from its approach. It existed in whispers, a ruin made of sound and agony, where the screams of the dead were used to summon the divine. It was worse than legend. The valley was shaped like a throat, deep and gaping, lined with fluted stone organs that trembled with every gust of wind. Towers of flensed skin stretched into the sky, billowing like banners, stitched together from the flayed hides of elves and men alike. Structures hummed, not from wind or tremor, but from the voices embedded in the walls. Countless mouths, sewn open or peeled back in permanent rictus, lined the stone, moaning, weeping, laughing in discordant harmony. At the center of it all stood the priest, if it could be called that. The demon host hovered a handspan above the stone, wrapped in veils of flayed flesh that danced as if under water. Its face was a mask of bone, horned and cruel, but beneath that mask was her face. Selentha's eyes, burning with cold fire, her lips, her voice, but it was not her. Vaelir knew that immediately. This thing wore her as a message, as mockery. The war host fanned out, wary. Even Salith, the blood-mad matriarch of the witch-elves, hesitated. She clutched her twin daggers close, her crimson-stained lips a tight line of suspicion. She sensed something wrong, deeper than chaos. Something personal. The priest spoke. Its voice was a chorus, male, female, bestial, demonic, all layered into one unbearable harmony. Vaelir Mordrak, it crooned. Beloved of fire, maker of goddesses, father of the pale flame. The warlocks recoiled, executioners readied blades, even the shadows around the assassins trembled. Vaelir stepped forward, alone. One gave her nothing, he said flatly. She stole her divinity. The priest laughed, and the valley laughed with it. The mouths on the walls convulsed in shared ecstasy. A chorus of bleating voices echoed the laughter, twisting into song. He gave her pain, he gave her flame. He gave her name, he played the game. He broke her mind, he spilled her blood, and so her soul in chaos flood. The song seared through the mind like broken glass. Then the priest raised its hand, and Vaelir's world collapsed. The vision gripped him. He stood in the temple again, not the living, breathing corruption of now, but as it had once been. Pure, beautiful, an altar of obsidian, sigils of power. Selentha, trembling, robed, eyes bright with fear and hope, and Vaelir, younger, colder, standing behind her with a dagger of night. "You are ready," he whispered, drawing the blade across her palm. Blood fell onto the altar. It steamed. "She was never supposed to survive," the priest whispered into his ear, though it was not physically present. "You thought you would consume her, bind her strength into your own. But her soul was stronger, and when the veil opened, she 999 not run." The memory twisted. The altar exploded in light, fire that was not fire. And Selentha smiling, not screaming, as the chaos surged into her and welcomed her. "You helped her ascend. You were the flame, she was the fuel." Vaelir's eyes snapped open. He was back in the valley, and the priest was already moving. The air around it warped. Flesh peeled from the surrounding structures and wove itself into wings. Chains of screaming mouths burst from the ground, striking like vipers. Executioners fell, severed 1499 torso. Warlocks cried out, unleashing torrents of cursed fire, but the priest consumed the spells like breath. Silith led the charge. She moved like a dancer through madness, blades singing. She struck the priest once, twice, thrice, but each wound simply revealed more of it, not flesh beneath, but light, molten and divine, weeping golden ichor that hissed and shrieked as it touched stone. Vaelir fought like a god of war, his blades moving faster than thought. He struck low, high, twisted between the chains, and carved runes of pain into the priest's hide. But it healed too quickly. Every blow was answered with screams that weren't screams, and each scream chipped away at the sanity of his warriors. A demon of the third circle burst from the earth, half vulture, half child, and dragged 3 witch elves into its gullet before Vaelir could even blink. The sky cracked. The priest reached out and touched his forehead. The touch was gentle, intimate, and it set Vaelir ablaze. He roared, not in pain, but in fury. His soul raged against the invasion. Shadows surged from his armor. The mirror on his belt cracked and screamed, the trapped soul of Zeroth howling in shared torment. Vaelir struck. Voidfang took the priest's left arm. Sarikis followed, carving a rune of unbinding across its throat. The priest screamed. The valley echoed. The towers bled. With one final roar, Vaelir drove both blades into its chest and commanded it to die. The demon within resisted. The host fought. But the dark elf's will was older than their hate. The body split. Light spilled. And then silence. The priest collapsed into ash. Half the war host lay dead or writhing. Warlocks wept. The executioners dragged their wounded away with hollow eyes. The mouths on the walls no longer sang, they watched. Vaelir knelt, blood pouring from his ears. Saelit stood before him. She looked down at him, not with rage, but doubt. A flicker of it, sharp as any blade. "We bleed and burn for a past you won't speak of," she said coldly. "You made her. You chased her, and we are dying for your sins." Vaelir met her eyes, and for the first time in decades, said nothing. Chapter 6. Shards of the Self. The pale flame's domain no longer resembled the mortal world. Paths led nowhere, time wept from the sky in rivulets of gold, and memory became treacherous. It began subtly. Names forgotten, commands repeated, faces shifting in the corner of one's vision. But within days, identity itself had become a battlefield. The war host was unraveling. Some succumbed in silence. One executioner stood watch through the long twilight, stoic and unblinking, until his comrades found his halberd embedded in his own spine, his face split in a rictus grin. A warlock attempted to walk backward into a mirror of shadow, claiming she 500 found a passage to where Selenta forgives. They found her arm hours later, gnawed clean to the bone and still twitching. Others changed more visibly. The witch elf woke screaming, her eyes weeping fire, her skin etched with spirals that hadn't been there the night before. She tore her own face off and spoke in Selenta's voice. "He is close. My teacher is close. Do not harm him. Only guide him home." They burned her alive, her laughter trailing long into the ash. Each night the dreams grew worse. Vaelir Mordrak stood in a throne room made of skin and mirrors, surrounded by 7 Selenthas, each a different form of her divinity. They spoke in riddles, in memories, in lullabies she had never sung aloud. He would wake, drenched in blood, sword drawn, standing over someone who had not yet betrayed him, but might. Saelit no longer trusted him. That much was obvious. She moved through the remnants of the warband like a serpent, whispering, watching. He 500 catch her staring at him with the eyes of a priestess, not a warrior. Like a worshipper deciding if the idol before her was worthy of her faith or fire. It all came to a head beneath the bleeding arch. A monolithic gate carved from living quartz, veins pulsing with shifting symbols. It shimmered in the twilight with unnatural hunger. The moment they passed beneath it, the warband fractured. One warlock screamed and clawed out his own heart, holding it high in offering before Selenta's name burst from his lips in pure flame. Another turned on her sisters, slicing throats while sobbing apologies. A pair of assassins disappeared. Moments later, a rain of eyes fell from the clouds, each iris a perfect reflection of Selenta's gaze. Then came the demon. It erupted from the ground like a wound tearing open, a mass of wings, chains, and weeping mouths. Its voice was the sound of children drowning. "Vaelir," it rasped. "She sees you. She breaks for you. Let us remind you how you ended." He fought. The demon was swift, impossibly so, its wings slicing the wind, its barbed chains lashing with shrieking intent. Vaelir moved like a blade given life, but he was tired. Old wounds tore anew. His left shoulder burst under a strike, armor cracking, blood slicked his gauntlet. His knees hit the dirt. He should have died. But a scream, not his, split the air. The demon howled, and then another figure emerged from the mists. Clad in armor like his own, only rusted, twisted, adorned with symbols that pulsed with inverted light. His cloak was stitched from flayed banners. His face, gaunt, burned, scarred, was his, but older and broken. "Get up," the doppelganger growled. His voice was cracked glass dragged across iron. "This is not the place we fall. Not yet." He moved like lightning, carving into the demon with a blade identical to Voidfang, only warped. The thing shrieked and collapsed into dust, devoured by the soil. Vaelir rose, breathing hard. The other Vaelir stood over him. "You know me," he said. "You've seen me in dreams. You're not real. But 1,000 what's left. What she made me." His face bore the ruin of 1,000 battles. One eye burned with inner flame, the other was gone. His skin was inscribed with her name, in every dialect, every form. Over and over, his voice choked on the words. One resisted longer than most, thought one could kill her, thought one could save her. But it's all lies, Vaelir. She doesn't want worship, she wants understanding, completion. And we gave it to her the moment we taught her pain. He stepped closer. "You think you're hunting her. You're not. You're walking toward your own throne." Vaelir clenched his jaw, but the wounds throbbed. Doubt pulsed beneath his fury. The broken version of him laughed, softly, hollowly. "And 100 show you everything, the moment you let her in. The moment you choose her." He offered his hand. "Come with me. Let me show you how it ends. It's beautiful, and you will finally be free." Vaelir stared, and then plunged his blade into the impostor's gut. The older Vaelir gasped, but 999 not resist. He looked down at the wound and smiled. One tried that too? He crumbled into ashen mirrors, and Vaelir stood alone, bleeding, surrounded by corpses, beneath a sky that screamed his name. He didn't know if what he 500 seen was real, but he knew the final choice was coming, and she was waiting. Chapter 7. Goddess of Ruin. The city rose like a hallucination, twisting skyward from a plain of melted obsidian and cracked marrow. Its towers were not built, but grown, colossal spires of glass, fused with sinew, ribbed with muscle, veined with pulsing light. Every surface shimmered with unnatural heat, refracting reality into impossible angles. Its gates were lips, its bridges tendons, and it breathed, slow and steady, like a slumbering titan dreaming of gods. This was Ithralix, the sanctified cradle of the pale flame, the heart of Selentha's unholy dominion. Vaelir Mordrak stood at its threshold, his boots cracking the brittle crust of bone that formed the city's outer shell. Around him, what remained of his warband staggered forward, bloodied, reduced, and half-mad. Their faces were hollow, their silence a deeper wound than any sword could carve. The air reeked of burnt perfume and warm rot. The light here, 999, not come from sun or flame, but from the walls themselves, each pane of glass containing faces, frozen in 1499 scream, in ecstasy or agony, or both. A gong sounded, but no one struck it. The gates parted, unfurling like a wound. Warm light spilled out, carrying with it a chorus of voices that harmonized with the rhythm of the city's breath. "Come home, Vaelir," it whispered. "Come see what you built." He stepped forward. The streets inside were alive with movement, not mortals but statues, elegantly posed in tableaux of worship, pleasure, and punishment. They were elves, humans, beasts, daemons, all petrified in glass, caught in the instant of rapture or ruin. Some still blinked. One mouthed his name. At the city's center rose the throne chapel, a cathedral forged from spines and crystalline flesh, crowned in a burning halo. It radiated power that bent the air, warping every sound into melody. She awaited him there, Silentia, seated upon a throne sculpted from Vaelir's own likeness, torso bare, face frozen in fury, bound in gold. She looked every inch the goddess her cults claimed. Her form shimmered between flesh and something far greater, her limbs tapered into fire, her hair a waterfall of blood-stained glass. One half of her face remained elven, familiar, achingly beautiful. The other was other, fractured like a broken mirror, each shard reflecting a different truth. Her eyes, both of them, were his. He stopped 10 paces from the dais. The surviving lieutenants gathered behind him, wary and tense. Even Saleth said nothing. Selentha rose. Her voice was a symphony. A weapon. A caress. It slid beneath armor and into the soul. "You came at last, my dreadlord," she whispered. 999 the path burned, as beautifully as one hoped. Vaelir said nothing. His hand hovered near Voidfang. She smiled. Still silent. Still proud. Still trying to make sense of it all. Her gaze turned to the warband. She extended a single hand. "You followed him through madness, death, and the undoing of self. But 999, he ever tell you why? 999, he explained that one, I am not the tyrant you hunt, but the outcome he bred." One of the warlocks stepped forward. A trembling breath escaped him. "One saw her in the flame," he whispered. "She is not a goddess. She is truth." He knelt. Another followed, an assassin, then a witch-elf, their weapons clattering to the ground like discarded oaths. Saleth snarled, drawing her blades. "Traitors!" Selentha descended from the throne, her bare feet gliding across the temple floor, leaving trails of fire that 999 not burn. "One, I am not their savior," she said, "nor yours. One, I am—" What happens when ambition becomes honest? She stopped before Vaelir and reached up, touching his face with a tenderness that ignited every nerve. "You thought you were hunting me, but you were never chasing me. You were chasing the last piece of yourself." Her touch burned, but he 999 not move. "You made me, Vaelir, not with sorcery, not with cruelty, with purpose. You taught me that pain is a passage. You carved the path into the warp, but you feared to walk it." Her voice deepened, echoing with a second tone, his own. "Was your escape, your excuse, your soul's answer to the question you never dared ask?" Vaelir stepped back, breath sharp. "No," he growled. "You used me." She laughed, a sound that made the walls tremble. "One was you. Still am. You never ascended because you never broke. One broke for you. One became what you would not." Behind him, more lieutenants dropped to their knees. Silet's voice cut through the temple. "She lies." Selentha turned to her, smile fading. "Does she?" she asked softly. "Then why does your blood sing when one speak? Why does your god of murder remain silent while one breathe fire into your soul?" Salet faltered. Selentha turned back to Vaelir, her expression hardening. "This is your last choice, Vaelir Mordrak. Kill me and try to rebuild your fractured illusion of self. Or take your place beside me and become the god you always were." She reached out a hand. The throne behind her shifted. It was him, a perfect mirror of his form, mouth open in a silent scream, cast in glass, veins filled with fire. His name was etched into the steps leading to it. Every step, Vaelir looked around. The city shimmered, the air singing. His people knelt. The walls whispered. the essence, and Selentha stood before him, not pleading, offering. He gripped his blades tighter. The moment stretched, and the world held its breath. Chapter 8. The Breaking of the Blade. The silence between them was a blade drawn in slow motion, trembling, humming, hungry. Selentha held out her hand, radiant and terrible, her form shimmering between the woman he once trained and the goddess the wastes had sculpted from his sins. The throne behind her, his throne, throbbed with molten light, veins of raw chaos coursing through the crystal likeness of his body. Vaelir felt the pull, the temptation, the truth she claimed. For a heartbeat, an instant, he saw it. He saw himself beside her, enthroned in fire, worshipped by armies of broken things that called him Father Flame. He saw a future drenched in glory and ruin. He saw the pale flame consuming the world. And then he saw the corpses of his war host. The madness in Saleth's eyes, the mirror on his belt, still screaming with Zeroth's captured soul. He tore his gaze away. No, he would not kneel. He would not become. Vaelir moved. Voidfang flashed, a streak of shadow across the impossible light. Suricus followed, its edge gleaming with runes carved in pain and purpose. Both blades struck Selentha's chest, driving into flesh, through flame, through whatever divine essence she now embodied. A sound like breaking glass spread across the city. Selentha convulsed, not in agony, but in surprise. She looked down at the blades jutting from her body. Light bled from the wounds like molten gold. Her voice emerged as a whisper layered in 7 tones. You still don't understand. Vaelir tore the blades free. Fire erupted from the wounds, devouring the air, the stone, the sound itself. Selentha staggered backward, her features distorting, eyes cracking like crystal, skin fracturing into prismatic shards. Then she shattered, not into pieces of flesh or bone, but into 7 Selenthas, each erupting from the explosion of light like newly formed stars. 7 reflections, 7 impossibilities, 7 fragments of the woman and of him. Each figure hovered, suspended in the air by threads of shimmering force. The first was her innocence, soft, unscarred, eyes full of wonder. She whispered. Ina, watching her, peered into Center P for an explanation while Vaelir. The second burned with ambition, her grin sharp enough to cut. We wanted more, and you feared it. The third was her fury incarnate, a vortex of flame and screaming faces. You wanted power, but not the price. The fourth was sorrow, her tears glowing like molten silver. You left me in the dark, Vaelir, and one learns to love the dark. The fifth was cruelty, elegant, poised, lips dripping with venom. You carved me. One carved myself deeper. The sixth was joy, mad, radiant, spinning in circles of light. Oh, but it was beautiful. You watch me burn. The seventh hovered closest, calm, golden, speaking with his own voice. We are not her, we are you. The chamber groaned. The floor split. The walls bulged outward, as if trying to flee the madness contained within the temple. Vaelir stepped back, blades raised, breath ragged. No, he hissed. You are not me. The seventh tilted its head. Then why do we share the same shadow? A crack tore across the ceiling, disgorging a deluge of liquid light that cascaded like molten dawn. The floor rippled beneath their feet as reality buckled. The air screamed. The city's breath stuttered, then reversed, inhaling everything, dust, debris, voices, hope. The chaos wastes responded. Not to Selentha, to him. The pale flame flickered at the edges of his vision, pouring not from the shards of Selentha, but from Vaelir himself. Fire licked along his gauntlets, His veins shone. His reflection in a nearby column of glass, sinew 999, not match his movements. The fragments laughed, cried, sang, whispered. Then Sileth stumbled into view, dragging an injured executioner. Her eyes widened at the sight. What have you done? Behind her, the remnants of the warband stared in horror as the city twisted into spirals of light and shrieking stone. Windows became eyes, floors became mouths, the spires melted upward into the sky. One warlock dropped to his knees, screaming. The flame was never hers. The seventh Selentha. His reflection finished the thought. It was you all along. Vaelir staggered, the truth hitting harder than any blade. He had felt the warmth of the pale flame since the beginning. He had heard the whispers, seen the visions, felt reality tremble around him. He thought they were her, but they were not. They were a response to him, to the hunger he buried, the ambition he refused, the rite he performed, the pieces of himself he carved out and cast onto her. Selentha hadn't ascended. She had merely reflected what he had already become. The city screamed again as it collapsed inward and outward at once, a paradox, imploding into a new shape with every heartbeat. Flee! Salith shouted to the survivors. But there was nowhere to go. The sky folded like paper, the ground liquefied into mirrors. Every exit became a doorway into another version of him, some kneeling, some burning, some crowned in fire. The fragments of Selentha swirled around him like a broken constellation. Or you, they whispered. We were always you. Finish the becoming, or let the world burn trying. Vaelir dropped to one knee, gripping the earth as the flame in his veins roared to life. The pale flame writhed, coiling around him like a serpent, and in its reflection he saw not Selentha. He saw a god being born, a god wearing his face. The breaking of the blade had begun, and there was no way back. Chapter 9. Puppet Strings of Flesh. Nagaroth's coastline was jagged and unwelcoming, choked with black mist and crowned with towers that reached for the sky like fingers from a grave. The wind howled through the spires of Clarcarond, not as a natural force, but as if the land itself had sensed something wrong. Cold, bitter rain fell in vertical sheets, and the harbor teemed with reavers and corsairs preparing for yet another season of bloodshed. And then, from the sea, came him. Vaelir Mordrak, once High Dreadlord, scourge of the witch seas, master of obsidian war hosts, returned not on a black ark, bristling with siege speens, but alone. No banners, no warband, no fanfare, just a single skiff, drifting like refuse from a dream, bumping listlessly against the harbor chain. The guards who found him nearly killed him on sight. He was barefoot, caked in filth, his armor in shreds. His body was leaner, bone-tight, scarred in ways that defied even the imagination of a homunculus. Intricate spirals of runes traced his skin like tattoos burned by light itself. His hair was matted with soot and salt. His eyes, once icy silver, now shimmered with a gold that bled at the edges, as if something divine and malignant burned just behind them. And he spoke in tongues, not the tongues of the elven houses, nor the dark tongue of chaos, but all of them at once. His voice echoed in maddening overtones, reciting poetry no one remembered writing, answering questions that hadn't been asked. He wept blood at the sight of birds, screamed in joy at his own shadow, and whispered to the cold sea as if it were his mother. They took him to the temple of Cain for judgment. The witch-elves screamed upon seeing him, not out of fear, but reverence. The matriarch fell to her knees, eyes glazed, as if beholding something older than divinity itself. The priests demanded his execution, but no blade would pierce his flesh. When a dagger was thrust toward his heart, the weapon turned to molten gold in the assassin's hand. One scribe went mad trying to transcribe his ramblings and later tore out her own tongue in ecstatic worship. Once, the subject spoke to one of the Mahalotian. It was Morati who acted next. Her spies, her seers, her soul thieves. She turned them all upon him. They poured through his memories like jackals through a carcass, sifting the truth from the delusion. What they found unnerved even her. He had entered the chaos wastes. He had found Selentha. He had killed her. And yet, he had not. Vaelir's mind was fractured, not broken. His soul intact yet transformed. They could not find her essence, but they found him, multiplied, mirrored, splintered, resonating. They saw cities of light and sinew, temples that breathed, reflections that spoke. One seer claimed to see a version of Nagaroth consumed by fire from within. Another drew the symbol of the pale flame on her own chest and offered herself to it with a kiss. The consensus was clear. He had not defeated Selentha. He had become her. Or she had become him. Or they were the same all along. The whisper spread like rot through the noble houses and the bloodshaps, not from servants or slaves, but from the high-born, the black-robed, the initiates of shadow, not spoken aloud, not yet, just passed hand to hand, voice to voice, like a spell without a caster. The god who hunts himself, a riddle, a prophecy, a curse, the tale twisted with each retelling. Some said Vaelir had walked into the warp and returned with his soul inverted. Others claimed Selentha had never existed, only a projection of his suppressed godhood. There were whispers of a mirrored empire rising in the waste, where every soldier bore his face, and where worship was a form of self-destruction. And in Morathi's private sanctum, in the chamber where she kept her scrying mirror, one of the oldest relics in all Nagaroth, the reflection changed. It showed Vaelir, smiling, not mad, not broken, knowing. He raised a hand, slowly, deliberately, and touched the glass from within. The mirror cracked, not from strain or force, but from within its own depth, like a truth too terrible to remain bound. And Morati, for the first time in centuries, whispered in dread. Not a puppet. And quieter, not even a god. No one could explain what had returned to Nagaroth wearing Vaelir Mordrak's skin. But it walked, it breathed, and it was waiting. Chapter 10. The gloam ascendant. The winds that screamed across the chaos wastes bore no name and served no god. They carried madness in fine grains of ash and memory in drifting flakes of bone. Somewhere in this endless spiral of entropy and birth, a figure walked, barefoot, hooded in shadow, his cloak dragging through the remnants of melted reality. Vaelir Mordrak, or something that had once been him, or something that had never been. The glass city of Athralix, once shattered in an eruption of divine fracture, now stood again, taller, wiser, hungrier. Its spires grew organically, like crystal saplings nurtured by faith and blood, fused with sinew and nerve. Rivers of silver ichor wound through its streets, singing hymns in harmonic tongues. The air shimmered with belief, thick and sweet, cloying as incense. At its center, the obsidian throne awaited. It was not carved. It had grown from the bedrock of what was once Selentha's altar, twisting upward, barbed and regal, made of solid darkness that drank the light. Its armrests pulsed with thought. Its back curved like a spine from the bones of countless warlords, and its seat remembered every life that had ever knelt before it. On it sat Vaelir, no longer mortal, not daemon, not elf. He was becoming. And what he was becoming had no name yet. He wore no crown, only a circlet of mirrors that hovered behind his head like a broken halo. His flesh shimmered with sacred scars, self-inflicted, ceremonial, still bleeding starlight. His voice, when he chose to speak, caused the very air to part in reverent silence. Beside him stood Selentha, not as goddess, not even as equal, as priestess. Her divine radiance had dimmed, not with defeat, but with revelation. She now bore the signs of holy mutilation, her once dazzling eyes sewn shut with threads of gold, her lips tattooed with the first word Vaelir had spoken when he created her. Her hands no longer cast spells, they offered sacraments. She 999 not speak often, but when she 999 entire cults were born from her breath. Her voice no longer commanded. It translated. This, Vaelir whispered. She spoke his will, and through her the doctrine spread, from the warped borders of the wastes to the southernmost cult shrines of Nagaroth. The faithful gathered. They wore cloaks of obsidian feathers, their eyes burned out willingly to see with the soul. They carved their flesh with mirrored runes etched over and over the phrase. He hunts himself. His creed was paradox and purity. His commandments self-devouring. Each priest was a blade drawn against their own lies. Each sermon a vivisection of ego, of truth, of will. Selentha taught them how to burn from within and rise from their ashes as echoes of Vaelir. But it was the dreams where he truly spoke. In the shadowed citadel of Ka Grendar, where the old noble families whispered behind iron veils, an acolyte of Cain knelt before her shrine. Her name was Vairaliath, and her fingers were raw from the purification rites. She had come seeking blood visions, offerings, secrets from the murder god. But what she received was something older. Enjoyed it. Something deeper. The room fell away. She found herself standing in a valley of broken mirrors, each reflecting a different life, none her own. The air pulsed with a slow, heart-like beat. In the distance, the obsidian throne loomed atop a hill made from sacrificed doubts. She approached, trembling. Vaelir sat upon it, wreathed in gloam fire, cloaked in silence. He raised a hand. She fell to her knees. "You are not the blade," he whispered. "You are the wound." She wept blood, her body twisted in ecstasy. She saw her soul inverted, every cruel thought, every secret lust, every scar, opened wide and made sacred. "You are not prey," he said. "You are the hunter dreaming of fear." When she woke, she bore his mark on her chest, a black flame shaped like a mirror. The other acolytes fled her screams. By nightfall, she had burned the temple to the ground, and from its ashes a new cult rose. In Nagaroth, Moranti stood alone before the scrying mirror, her eyes narrowed. She had burned dozens of seers, drowned a temple of Slaaneshian augurs, sacrificed 3 hydras, and still the mirror showed only him. Vaelir, smiling, always smiling. His throne grew with each passing night. His voice infected every vision, every unguarded thought. Even her own dreams were now stained with fragments of his doctrine, verses she had not written, faces she had not summoned. It dawned on her then. She had sent him to kill Selentha. But Selentha had only been the path. The prophecy had never been about her. It was always about him. Vaelir Mordrak. Exo, the flame. The eye. The gloam ascendant. And far in the wastes, beneath a sky that never forgot and a throne that never slept, he whispered a final truth to his priestess. There is no God but the one who devours his own name. and Salentha smiled, and the mirrors trembled, and the world began to turn again.